Ever since I was young, I loved going to carnivals. The lights, the games, and the excitement of it all drew me in. I know plenty of people see them as weird or childish, but not me. Growing up in a small Indiana town, there wasn't much else to do, so whenever a carnival came through, I spent as much time there as possible. Even now, more than 20 years later, I still enjoy the thrill of a local carnival. And despite what I'm about to share with you, I don't think my love for carnivals will ever truly fade. I was around 10 or 11 when this particular event happened. I was kind of a nerdy kid back then. In the days leading up to the spring carnival, I found myself at the library, browsing whatever caught my interest at the time. For some reason, I ended up in the history section. The books there were literally covered in layers of dust, as if untouched for ages. I was flipping through a book on our town's history when a small, faded slip of paper slid out from between the pages. Surprised, I bent down to pick it up. To my delight, it was an old ticket for our town's spring carnival, dating back over 15 years. The odds of finding something like that seemed almost too good to be true, and I was thrilled. This would make a cool addition to my little collection of random finds at home. Even more exciting was that the date on the ticket was just a couple of days away, the exact day when the carnival would be back in town. As I had guessed, the carnival arrived the next morning, so I thought, why not bring the old ticket along and see what the guy at the entrance would say? I figured it would be funny to see his reaction, and I wanted to get the ticket punched as a keepsake. The following evening, I went to the carnival with the ticket tucked safely in my pocket. The carnival was as lively as ever, the air filled with the sweet smell of cotton candy and popcorn. I pulled out the ticket and handed it to the attendant at the gate. The moment he saw it, his expression shifted. He went pale, his eyes widening before he quickly masked his reaction with an awkward smile. Honestly, it was a little creepy. Enjoy your night, he stammered, giving me the ticket back without punching it. His reaction was so strange that I forgot to ask him to stamp it. I shrugged it off, assuming maybe he was new and just confused by the ticket's old design. I wandered around, played some games, and treated myself to a funnel cake. It was a great night, but something felt off. I started to notice employees glancing at me with odd looks. After a while, I'd had enough and decided to ask an older game operator about it. I approached an elderly man at the ring toss booth and showed him the ticket. Unlike the guy at the entrance, he didn't bother to hide his surprise. He looked around nervously before leaning closer to me. "Where did you find this?" he asked. After I explained where I'd come across it, I began to feel uneasy. Maybe I shouldn't have taken the ticket from the library. "You stumbled upon something best left alone," the old man whispered, his voice barely audible. "That ticket, it's tied to a story folks around here don't talk about much." He paused, weighing whether to continue. "About 15 years ago, something bad happened during this very carnival, right in our town," he said. "There was a young worker named Ryan, a friendly kid everyone liked. He was in charge of one of the rides, though I can't remember which. Then one night, he vanished. No trace, nothing. They found his wallet, but all that was inside was a ticket that looked just like this one," he said, motioning to the ticket in my hand. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but part of me was skeptical. "And you believe that?" I asked, trying to hide my unease. The man shrugged. "I've seen enough to keep an open mind. But this ticket, it could stir things up. Best you leave it here." He gestured for me to hand it over, but I hesitated. I looked at the ticket again, wondering if there was some hidden meaning I'd overlooked. "It's just a ticket," I muttered, unconvinced. The old man's expression darkened, his tone turning stern, almost angry. "Give it here," he growled. For a moment I considered it, but ultimately I didn't want to part with my find over some silly ghost story. When I refused, he lunged at me, trying to snatch the ticket from my hand. Startled, I pulled away, clutching it tightly. His face twisted into something desperate, almost feral. "You don't understand," he hissed, his eyes darting around as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the darkness. My heart raced as I backed toward the exit, stammering, "I think I'll just go." I slipped away into the crowd, his pleas fading behind me. The joy of the carnival had soured, and I left earlier than I'd planned, the ticket feeling heavier in my pocket. In the days that followed, my luck took a sharp turn for the worse. I missed my bus, scraped my knee in a bike accident, and worst of all, my best friend accused me of stealing his prized baseball card, something I'd never do. And things only got worse. I came home one night to find my mom crying after she lost her job, and a week later, my brother broke his leg skateboarding. Our beloved family dog, Bean, passed away just a few days after that. It was like a dark cloud had settled over our lives. I couldn't shake the old man's warning about the ticket. It seemed silly, but so did the string of misfortunes that followed me around. My dad laughed when I mentioned it, dismissing it as superstition. One rainy afternoon after school, after a day where I'd forgotten my lunch and had to go hungry, I took the ticket out again. I stared at it, this small piece of paper that seemed to bring nothing but bad luck. Angry and frustrated, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed my raincoat and walked down to the creek behind our house. My heart pounded as the rain soaked through my hair. Standing by the water's edge, I took one last look at the ticket, then tore it into small pieces and watched them float away with the current. "It's just a piece of paper," I muttered. Things started to improve after that. My friend found his baseball card and apologized, we made up, and I didn't miss the bus again that school year. My mom found an even better job in the days that followed. Whether it was all just a coincidence or if the ticket really was cursed, I couldn't say. But one thing was certain, I learned to be more careful about the things I took home with me. Even after all this, I don't believe in the supernatural. My parents still joke that I imagined everything because I was so young. It's still hard to explain, but I've since accepted it as one of those odd coincidences that you just can't explain. Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and nerves. When I landed a summer job at a local carnival in downtown LA, I was just looking for some extra cash before my senior year of college started in the fall. The carnival was a typical setup with rides, games, and food stands, but its main attraction was the funhouse, which doubled as a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure, which I think used to be some old guy's mansion or something. I was assigned to manage the funhouse, a favorite among the carnival goers. It seemed simple enough. Guide the guests in, ensure they had a fun, safe time, and watch them leave. At first, everything seemed straightforward. But then, I started noticing odd things. It started with small discrepancies. I'd count a dozen people entering, but only 11 would emerge. At first, I chalked it up to miscounting. After all, keeping track amid the chaos of laughter and screams was no easy task. However, as the days passed, the numbers just didn't add up. 7 went in, 6 came out. 10 went in, 9 came out. Was I going crazy? Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy afternoon, a blonde girl caught my eye as she walked up to the funhouse. She was drop-dead gorgeous and seemed out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. I had to do a double-take. I'm not a weird guy by any means, but I couldn't help but lock eyes with her for a few seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the attraction. After she disappeared into the darkness, I went back to my duties, occasionally glancing at the entrance. As people entered and exited, sometimes asking me questions and whatnot, I kept an eye out, hoping to see her again. Pretty soon, I started noticing that groups who had entered after her were already emerging. A few more minutes passed, and I started getting worried. She should have been out by now. Compelled by genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for a few minutes and go looking for her. I stepped inside and locked the entrance door behind me. I began investigating, navigating the dimly lit rooms and narrow corridors. As I moved through the house, I noticed something from my initial walkthrough, a barely noticeable seam in the wall. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but curiosity got the best of me. I pressed against the seam, and I heard a distinct click. After playing around with it a bit more, my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized it was a hidden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing here? I was definitely going to have a long conversation with my boss about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I was too surprised to be nervous, still shocked by the whole situation. At the end of the passage, I found another door. I flung it open, and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the carnival grounds. I sighed in relief. This discovery explained why some guests seemed to go missing. They had probably stumbled across the secret door and assumed it was the correct way out. As I walked back the way I'd come, I couldn't help feeling a bit bummed that I wasn't going to get a chance to talk to that girl. For some reason, I decided to keep exploring the funhouse instead of returning to my post. I think a part of me just wanted a few extra minutes of this impromptu break. I walked through a couple more rooms, and that's when I noticed it. Another faint seam on one of the walls, identical to the first one. I fiddled with it until it clicked and swung open. But this one was different. The putrid smell was the first thing I noticed. More concerning, though, was that there was no corridor this time but a ladder that led downward. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground floor, and I was specifically told that this place didn't have a basement. I debated climbing down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl might be down there. Against my instincts, I began the descent. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I was expecting to find a basement, but what I found instead was far, far worse. At the bottom, I pulled out my phone's flashlight and I froze in shock. I was standing in a tunnel that extended into the darkness. There was no way this was part of the house above. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn back, but the mystery was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp and the tunnel was completely silent. As I explored, my flashlight beam fell on something unexpected, a white, glittery purse lying in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It looked familiar, and then it hit me. It was that girl's purse. I was sure of it. I started to panic. Was she really down here? I doubted any rational person would find this tunnel and not turn back, but the proof was literally in my hands. My mind started racing. Was she hurt? Lost? And then a more terrifying thought hit me. Was she alone? I didn't feel safe anymore, but I was in too deep. Violating every survival instinct I had, I called out for the girl. I waited. Nothing. I was about to shout again when I heard rapid footsteps echoing through the tunnel. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running toward me was hostile. I turned and bolted back to the ladder. I got halfway up and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The footsteps were almost on top of me now, and I braced myself for a fight. Then a voice rang out, a girl's voice. Her voice. She gasped, clutching her side as if in pain. I yelled at her to climb up, but she insisted I follow her back into the darkness. I told her there was no way I was doing that and basically forced her up the ladder. We got to the top and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how she ended up down there, but she couldn't give me a straight answer. She kept saying she didn't remember how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing things moving in the dark and voices calling to her. I didn't know how to process this. I asked if someone had guided her down there, but she didn't remember. The weirdest part was the blank stare she gave me. It genuinely freaked me out. I basically interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I'd had enough. I wanted to get as far away from her as possible. I called the police, but she chose to leave the funhouse before they arrived. I never saw her again. The police investigated, and what they found was actually insane. Apparently, This house had been a safe house during Prohibition in the 1920s and had a bunch of secret passageways leading to a section of the underground Prohibition tunnels that hadn't been discovered. The owner claimed he had no idea about the house's history, but I was skeptical. Quit my job and got as far away from that place as possible. I still have so many questions. Did the owner know about this? Was that girl almost kidnapped? Had someone knocked her out and taken her down there? Or was she somehow part of it all? I feel like there are a number of explanations for what happened to me, but all of them are equally terrifying. I despise carnivals. I find them gross and overrun with kids. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of the whole place. My dislike for carnivals is probably biased, though, and mostly because of what I'm about to share. A few years back, my younger sister dragged me to our local carnival. I wasn't going to be rude and say no, but I definitely wasn't thrilled about going. After some time, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called our mom to pick us up. I decided not to go with them since I was in the middle of an argument with my dad and didn't want to go home until he'd gone to bed. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she took my sister and left. The carnival was pretty underwhelming, honestly. There were way fewer people than in past years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a bit to get my money's worth. After all, I'd paid for my own ticket. I decided to step into the funhouse, thinking it might at least be a little interesting. I expected it to be full of people, but it was completely empty. Not a single other person in sight, as far as I could tell. I'd never been inside a fun house alone before, and it's strange how much the laughter and chatter add to the atmosphere. Without it, you're just standing in silence, surrounded by a bunch of odd mirrors. It was honestly kind of unsettling. I shrugged and figured I might as well go through it. I did get a decent laugh out of the distorted mirrors, I'll admit. I think I was about halfway through when I noticed something strange in one of the reflections to my left. There was a head like someone was peeking at me. I only caught it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with deeply sunken eyes. I spun around but didn't see anyone. To be honest, I couldn't even tell where he would have been standing, considering all the mirrors around. He could have been anywhere. It felt even creepier because I didn't hear the entrance door open. He either snuck in behind me, or he was already inside. I kept moving, a bit faster now, and then I saw him again, just out of the corner of my eye. This time he wore a twisted smile. It was the same face, I was sure of it. I tried to figure out where he was, but the mirrors were too confusing. I shouted at him to back off, but there was no response. I'm not even sure what I expected him to do. I sped up again, but navigating this maze of mirrors was difficult, and I kept running into dead ends. I was sweating, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. A couple of minutes later, after another dead end, I turned a corner, and a hand shot out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist. I screamed and cursed at him to let go, but his grip was firm. I punched his arm, and he finally released me. I hit the ground in the struggle, and got my first real look at him. He was in all gray, had a bit of a belly, and an exhausted, sunken face. I scrambled to my feet before he could reach for me again, and sprinted back the way I'd come. Maybe it was survival instincts kicking in, but somehow it felt easier to find the exit with adrenaline pumping through me. I dashed out of the funhouse and caught my breath outside. I reached for my back pocket, and a terrible realization hit me. My wallet was gone. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there, so I ran to the nearest staff member and told her everything. She looked confused and mentioned that the fun house was closed to visitors that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like an idiot. I told them the guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So, reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I was hurt or anything. I wish I could say that's where the story ended, but I can't. A week later, my girlfriend called me in a panic, frantically telling me something awful had happened. Apparently, someone had been texting her, pretending to be me, and convinced her to drive to a remote spot to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad along, even though the person told her to come alone. When they arrived, they quickly realized something was wrong. The car in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out and 6 guys climbed out of the car in front of them. He ran back to their car, and they sped off before those guys could reach them. The whole situation suddenly made sense. I had my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explained how they got her contact. We both changed all our information, and it's been a month with no further incidents. I don't really know how to process all of this. I think I'm just going to try to push the memory out of my mind. Carnivals have always intrigued me, not just for the rides and games, but for the sense of wonder and mystery they carry. I've always been captivated by the magic shows, the illusions that challenge reality and leave you questioning what you just saw. One summer, I experienced more than I bargained for when I encountered the disappearing magician. It was a warm evening, and my friends and I decided to visit a traveling carnival set up just outside town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fairgrounds as we passed through the entrance. The air was electric, filled with laughter, music, and the tantalizing sense of carnival food. As we wandered through the attractions, we came across a small tent tucked into a quiet corner. A hand-painted sign outside read "The Disappearing Magician, prepare to be amazed." Curiosity piqued, we decided to check it out. We bought tickets from a stern-looking man at the entrance and stepped inside. The tent's interior was dimly lit, with rows of wooden benches facing a makeshift stage. We settled near the front, eager to see what kind of magic this performer had in store. A hush fell over the audience as the lights dimmed further and a spotlight illuminated the stage. The magician stepped into the light. Dressed in a black suit with a crimson satin lining, he was tall and lean, with piercing blue eyes and a sly smile. Introducing himself as Victor Valente, he promised a show unlike any other. His voice was smooth and magnetic, drawing us in with every word. Victor began with a few simple tricks, pulling a rabbit from a hat, making objects vanish and reappear. The audience applauded, but I sensed there was more to his act, a tension in the air hinting at something extraordinary. For his grand finale, Victor announced he would perform his famous disappearing act. He selected a volunteer from the audience, a young woman named Lisa, who nervously climbed on stage. Victor reassured her, saying she had nothing to worry about, then draped a large red velvet cloth over her. He muttered some incantations, his voice echoing through the tent, and then whipped the cloth away. Lisa was gone. The crowd gasped and a chill crept down my spine. Victor smiled and bowed, but there was an unsettling look in his eyes. He promised Lisa would reappear momentarily and disappeared behind the curtain. Minutes passed, and the atmosphere grew tense as people began murmuring and shifting in their seat. Victor eventually reappeared, looking slightly panicked. He attempted to carry on with the show, but it was clear something had gone wrong. He announced a short break and hurried backstage. My friends and I exchanged worried glances, sensing that something was off. We decided to sneak around to the back of the tent to see what was happening. As we approached the rear entrance, we overheard hushed voices. Peering through a small gap in the fabric, we saw Victor arguing with the stern-looking man from the ticket booth. "We have to find her," Victor hissed. "This has never happened before." The man shook his head. "You shouldn't have tried the disappearing act here. There are things you don't understand." Before we could catch more of their conversation, the man noticed us. "You kids shouldn't be back here," he barked. "Go back to your seats." We quickly retreated, our curiosity now mixed with fear. We returned to our seats, but the mood had shifted. The lights flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the tent, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Victor returned to the stage, visibly shaken. He apologized for the delay and vowed to bring Lisa back. He performed the disappearing act again, this time with a sense of urgency, but when he removed the velvet cloth, Lisa was still missing. The audience erupted in confusion and concern. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, plunging the tent into darkness. There was a collective gasp, followed by the sounds of shuffling and whispers. I felt a hand grab my arm, and I nearly screamed, only to realize it was my friend. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. "Something's wrong." We stumbled our way out of the tent, hearts racing. As we emerged into the cool night air, a blood-curdling scream echoed from inside. People began pouring out, faces pale, eyes wide with terror. I looked back and saw Victor standing at the entrance, his face twisted in anguish. We ran to the Carnival staff, yelling for help. They rushed to the tent, but when they went inside, they found it empty. Victor, Lisa, and the stern man had all vanished without a trace. The tent held nothing but an eerie silence and a lingering, unearthly scent. The police were called, and they searched the fairgrounds, but found no signs of the missing people. The carnival packed up and left town the next day, leaving behind a cloud of unanswered questions and lingering fear. Months passed, but I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I scoured the internet, trying to find any information about Victor Valente and his disappearing act, but there was nothing. It was as if they had never existed. The only evidence was the chilling memory that haunted my dreams and the unsettling feeling that something beyond comprehension had touched our lives. I haven't been to a carnival since, and I doubt I ever will. The memory of that vanishing act and the terror it left behind is something I'll never forget. Some illusions, it seems, are more real than we could ever imagine. If these carnival horror stories made you double-check your locks, hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. Have you ever had a close call at a carnival? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to share the scare with a friend who's up for a fright. And remember, not every stranger is who they seem. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.